Hello to all of you. Well, it's 1 p.m. South African time and I think 7 p.m. Bali time. Awesome to have you online tonight, Roger. And I know that you've just finished a big webinar with everyone from around the world. And I'm really excited and thankful that you're prepared to come here today and share with everyone and let them know some of the trends that are happening around the world and what it means to be a global citizen.
Well, it's good to be here, Scott. Thanks for inviting me.
So just a little story about yourself, and I think it's just to put it into perspective. You know, you've got the book out, the Millionaire Master Plan, which I highly recommend that people read. And, you know, from my perspective, I met you back in 2010. You asked me to come on stage and to kind of just share where I was at and what was happening. And I'll never forget, it's the first time I had actually come across some of your material. And I was so interested that the next day I was the one signing up and actually joining. And, you know, I always joke with people. I've done a lot of coaching in my life. I've had the privilege of working with Tony Robbins and some of the best. And, you know, I often say to people, you know, you vote with your feet. And you and I have worked together for the best part of now 7 years. And I've learned so much from you. And I just, you know, I'm not blowing smoke or anything, but really for people out there, particularly in South Africa, there are a lot of kind of people that come from overseas and promise the world and then run away and people don't get results. And, you know, I just say personally for me, it's, you know, I've learned so much. And just to give people perspective, there's 3 major things that you helped me do. The first one was effectively this next slide, which is very much your wealth dynamics. And I, as an entrepreneur, would be reading all these books, and you know that I love to read lots of books. And you know, I'd read a book like E-Myth, and it was all about systemization. And I'd basically every year write my goals, and it'd be like, right, this year I will systemize my business. And every year I'd get to the end of the year, and I'd beat myself up because I hadn't systemized my business. And I finally came across your system of wealth dynamics. And for those people who don't know it, you know, just Google wealth dynamics. I highly, highly, highly recommend, you know, you go and look at it. And I wouldn't mind, Roger, if you just explain it in 30 seconds just now. But in simple terms, you said to me, Scott, you mustn't do systems. You need to go and find someone that's very good at systems. And I'll never forget where I was standing. For most people, you know, they know the lost city here. And I can actually remember I was standing on a pier. You and I were having a coaching call. I was on my telephone. And you told me exactly what I needed to find. And I knew exactly who the person was, Jaco Moritz. And I went and headhunted him and managed to get him on board. And, you know, today we're in a whole different stratosphere of where we were back in 2010 just by finding that right person. And I think what you teach in wealth dynamics is such an incredible skill for people to understand, because it's going to be good at what you're good at and find people that are good at what they're good at. And, you know, this lesson alone for me was a life changer. And I, you know, I don't use those words lightly. You know, we've got quite a big business now, and it really came from yourself actually helping us know what we needed to do to go to the next level. Could you just explain this just a little bit? Like, it's so simple and yet so powerful.
Well, I think the most important thing is anyone who's going to be an investor or an entrepreneur is the way to get there is to do the opposite of what you're taught at school, right? So at school, standardized testing is focused at your weaknesses. So you're spending all your time on your lowest grades. Whereas if you're going to actually be successful in the world, in business, you have to have a team, which means it's not doing it on your own, and you can't be focusing at your weakness because everyone gets to success by getting to their strength. And so it's knowing that you're actually doing the things that don't feel like hard work and the things that are easy to do, as opposed to things that feel like hard work. So you've got to unlearn everything you've learned at school to do it. But once you do that and you start saying, oh, okay, so that means I can't be doing everything myself. I need a team. Well, then what team do I need and what should I be doing? So wealth dynamics explains there's 8 different paths which are linked to the different seasons. They're linked to whether we're more creative or whether we are more sensory, whether we're more extrovert, whether we're more introvert. And these 8 paths are the 8 paths that anyone who's got to success as an entrepreneur or as an investor is the path that they've taken. So someone like Richard Branson or Steve Jobs, they've always been really, really good at following their strength, which is being creative and having their head in the clouds. They've always avoided going into the whole having to listen and being like ear to the ground. Whereas you take someone like a Warren Buffett, or you take someone like a George Soros, who are very, very good at timing, not creativity, which is having their ear to the ground, using sensory thinking as opposed to using their creative or their innovative thinking. So understanding that, when you're doing one, you can't do the other. When you're up, you can't be down. And similarly with extroverts and introverts, you talk about systems. The people who are really good at being introvert and looking at systems, which is asking the question how, they can do that easily because they know how to ask the question, how can this happen without me? But if you're very extrovert and you love being around people the whole time, you don't want to be doing it without you. You want to actually be a part of it. So people like Oprah Winfrey, who's a star, all the great leaders out there like Jack Welch and Meg Whitman and the people that have gone out and built big companies, They've done it by being in front of the people all the time, which is not answering the question how, it's asking the question who. And that all links into fundamentally how all money is made, which is understanding how value is created, which is the top and bottom of the square, and understanding how that value is then leveraged, which is the left and right hands of the square. So that, I mean, that's a lot longer than a minute, but you get the idea. 8 different profiles that actually have each a natural path that takes them to where they need to get to easily.
Where's the easiest place? Because I know you explain this a lot. Well, to be fair, there's plenty of places they can go and get the information, including your Entrepreneur TV. But if to get the book, The Millionaire, in terms of where's the best place, is just to Google it, or where do you recommend people get that?
This thing, if anyone wants to really, if they're curious, you can actually go to wdprofiletest.com and you can read it all. It's all there. The test is there as well, so you can go do the test. And we've got a kind of light version of the test called Genius U, which is used by many people because it's a free test that you can just do to find out which side of the square you're on. But yeah, over 500,000 people have taken it over the years, and the biggest thing of it is it doesn't put you in a box, it gives you a pathway. And so it's not just about saying, well, what is it you should do? It's giving you the role models to follow. And more importantly, it's telling you who not to follow, because there's always going to be someone who's doing the opposite of what you should be doing that's going to make it look easy. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy for you. So it's very easy to get seduced into following someone else who's a different pathway from yours. It's like Warren Buffett says that, right? He says like the worst thing that he ever tried was public speaking. So he says, I don't even bother about public speaking unless I actually absolutely have to. I'd rather be on my own, and that's how he makes all his money. And just understanding that when you actually just be okay with not having to be great at everything and just double down on your strengths, it really does change everything. So yeah, you can go and have a look at that website, and then you can kind of like take the links from there to find out more about it as well.
Cool. So just Kevin's kindly put that in the chat box for everyone, so you can just go and click on it. And obviously the book, The Millionaire Master Plan, really talks about it. And it's not just understanding what your right profile is, but it's also understanding what to do next, which I think is what Roger's talking about in terms of providing you a pathway. And I have to say, this for me is, just as a friend to everyone out there, I highly, highly recommend you go and test it. And one of the things I always say to any budding entrepreneur, no matter how old they are or investor, and particularly every kid, is go and do this. Like, find out what your greatness is, and then really kind of, because since you helped me get into the space in 2010, 2011, I think you would have seen a little bit of growth in me as well, because I could finally focus on what I'm good at and not kind of trying to do spreadsheets and systems, which I definitely wasn't put on this planet to do. So, and then the second thing you helped me, so I always say there's 3 major things. The second thing was you actually helped me get my book out, Property Going Global. And again, I didn't want to write a book. And I thought, what's the point of writing a book? Because at the moment I write about London property, by the time I've finished writing about it, it's over, over. And you said, no, well, write about the systems, write about the methodology, make it evergreen. And that really was a game changer for me. And today we've got the GPS system and GIDS, and it's endorsed by Clem Sunter and everything. So you were the one that really helped me with that. And the third one, which I've told you before, but I think it's quite important, is that I wrote my dissertation back in '98 on how technology was going to change the real estate, property game, whatever you want to call it. And I never knew what the word crowdfunding was, but it was actually you that brought me to the concept of crowdfunding. Like, I wanted to use technology to change things, but you were the one that actually shared with me crowdfunding. And I'll never forget getting hold of Henny. And him and I had already been talking about creating a company, and he wanted to create an international property fund, and I wanted to do it, but differently with technology. And I remember getting hold of him and actually playing the soundbite back of the coaching call with you and saying to Henny, dude, I'm doing this like now is the time. And basically persuading him to get on board. And today Wealth Migrate is going places. And again, it started with that conversation. So I just wanted to put that in context for people, because a lot of people kind of just, I don't know, a lot of coaching, a lot of people, particularly in South Africa, are pretty disillusioned with international coaches and advice givers and consultants and whatever else you want to call them. So,
I will make a distinction about that. I think is really important. There's a really, really big difference between teaching teachers and leading learners, right? Like all the people I'll follow won't be teaching teachers who are people who say they're a coach or say they're a speaker, because those people, they make their money off coaching or speaking. But there is lots of people out there now who are sharing their knowledge. As you know, we were both on Necker Island with Richard Branson, and he's more than happy to share his knowledge, and he's more than happy to, even charge people to come there and be with him, and help Virgin Unite to do that as well. But he's not making most of his money from his mentoring or from his speaking. He's making his money from practicing by actually doing it, which means he has to be up to date, because we're living in a world today where whatever someone's teaching you that worked last year is already out of date. So unless they're themselves having to learn the new ways of doing it, you're not going to be able, even if they used to be great, you're not going to learn great stuff out of them. So I make sure I'm doing that, where, vast majority of what I do is building my businesses, and then any mentoring I do, I'm doing because I'm actually interested in the businesses I mentor as well, which is really, I think that's a really important distinction.
No, that's awesome. And so just for everyone online today, and we were actually talking about this before we started, I've got to the point nowadays where if people just want to watch a presentation, like we can literally film one, stick it on YouTube, and they can watch it. So what I did is I put together a couple of questions. Kevin and I went through it, and a couple of other team members. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of run through, like almost in a Q&A type session, and to just, I want to kind of get the inside knowledge, the stuff that you don't necessarily see on the YouTube. So one thing that fascinates me is that, you're born in Singapore. You went to, it was Cambridge University, I think it was, huh? You started your businesses in Singapore and Hong Kong, and now living in Bali. You epitomize that whole thing of a global citizen. And for me, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to be a global citizen? How does one, think like that? How does one? It's very easy to, I think, to understand in theory, but most people don't have any idea how to do it in practice.
Sure. Well, there's two things, right? There's the practicality of how do you do it, and then there's the other part, which is why would you want to do it? And I think that I'll start with the why would you want to do it to begin with. We're actually living in a world today where it's actually easier to set up a global business than a local one, right? I wouldn't be good at setting up a local business because I define a global business as being one in which you can work from anywhere. So if you're actually having to design a business where I can be anywhere in the world and it still works, then it means that I'm already designing a business where I have time freedom. And if I was having to set up a business where I have to show up at the office every day, then I wouldn't have my time. So it's actually easier to set up a global one because we've got all the tools to do it, and then get my time back and design it in that way rather than actually do it where I've got to show up every day. And similarly, it's not just a company where you can work from anywhere. It's also a company where you can learn from everywhere. Because when I always find that when you set up What's Migrate, and I was mentoring you on What's Migrate, I didn't start by saying, well, let's look at other crowdfunding companies in South Africa that are funding, because there weren't any. So you can't do that. But we could say, well, let's look at some in America. Let's look at some in Europe. And you could then see what's happening in other countries, and then it informs you in your own country. So it's actually easier if you look at the whole world as opposed to just looking at one area. So that's why I say it's easier, which means anyone who thinks that's difficult is kind of getting it back to front. The question why you would want to, that's a much deeper question, because we're living in a world today where all the biggest challenges we have, frankly, are global challenges, right? Whether it's the environment, whether it's poverty, whether it is the challenges we've got with equality. These are not located just in South Africa or just in Indonesia. These are all over the world, and there isn't a single government in the world whose remit is to go and sort that problem out. And because of that, you've got to say, well, then who's going to solve those? Because this is our world that we're living in. And the reality is, it's whoever actually sees beyond borders, whoever's not saying, well, I'm just African or I'm just British, so that's the only place I'm going to focus at. So why? I believe it's why, because that's the best service I can be as a human being, is to actually be thinking about the whole thing rather than actually start putting up borders. And that would be the way I'd share it. Now, the final part I'd just say, so I know you've got other questions there as well, which is the how. Like if anyone's sitting there thinking, yeah, but how do you do that? The way you do it is you go on holiday and you don't come back. I mean, you don't just say, well, I'm just going to go for a bit and come back. You say, well, what would happen if I just went out and I stayed there, right? I mean, I stayed out and then I might come back to my house for a holiday, but if I did that, how would I have to think differently? So when I was in England, and then I was like, okay, well, things are happening in Asia. This was 2006. That's like 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 1996. So 1996, when I moved out to Asia, 1 year before the Asian crisis, I didn't know the Asian crisis was coming. I wanted to be in the middle of Asia where I thought things were going to grow, because that's when they were talking about the Asian tigers. And I remember going out to Singapore thinking, well, this place is English speaking, so I don't speak any Asian language, so hopefully this will be a place I can stay. And I found out within the first week that you can't actually live in Singapore unless you have a work permit, and you can't get a work permit as an entrepreneur. There's still countries like that around the world. The only way I could do it is by getting a job. So how do you set up a business if you have to get a job? So I just said, okay, well, my job now is to get a job where I can set up my own business. And I just went hustling, going around door to door, finding the entrepreneurs that would be willing to give me a job and give me a work permit in exchange for me helping them in their business. I found one. That then led to me then getting a work permit within a month, being able to start a business, which is I did, and that kind of led on from there. So, you don't know what challenges you're going to get until you get there. if I thought of just going there on holiday and coming back, I never would have had to force myself to figure it out. But once you do, there's always a way.
No, it's classic. Maybe that's why I live in Neisner. I'm looking forward to going home today. I'm not lying. I'm in a hotel room here and jumping on an airplane after this to go home to the top holiday resort in South Africa. So I'm looking forward to getting home.
I tell you what, this is happening right now, right? I mean, like, you've been off to China, you've been traveling all over the world, which is now necessary for your business, and it's really putting you into entirely new areas. But if you think about that, right, how much has your mindset changed about what's possible by just going and spending time in China, for example, right?
Oh, dude. Like, I mean, look, safely, for me, China is the greatest opportunity I've seen in my entire life. And I tell everyone that, anyone that's prepared to listen. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I even joke with people, at a very simple level, we did a small event in Beijing, small being 8 people. And in 8 or 9 years of doing presentations in South Africa with little feedback forms, I don't think anyone's ever ticked the box that they would invest $1 million. Like, we've had quite a few people invest $1 million, but they never ticked a little box the first time they met you. And out of 8 people, 3 of them ticked the box to say they'll invest $1 million.
Right.
I mean, just to put it in perspective, the scale is just unbelievable.
And I think that's the thing, right? The actual immersion of being in a place, experiencing that, seeing that. I think that, I mean, like, I'm making this call from our resort in Bali. I came out to Bali. We were living in Singapore at the time. At the time when we did this, which was well over a decade ago, we didn't have the money to buy, because, Indonesia, you have to pay cash. You can't leverage with mortgages or anything. And so if you're going to buy a resort, you better have a lot of cash. So we thought, okay, we'll come out to Bali and we'll give ourselves 5 years to figure it out, right? Within the first 2 weeks of being here, we found the resort. Within the first month, we were already in it. Until you actually go physically to wherever it is you're going to, you never know what's possible. And that was in my very early 30s. I have a resort in Bali, and it's like, how did that happen? And then when I started showing people, well, when I first got to the resort, we rented it before we bought it, and the cost of the rental on a resort, which is a beautiful resort with 17 bedrooms, is actually less than a 2-bedroom flat in Singapore. And when people go, what? How's that even possible? I said, I don't know, tell me. I had no idea either. But that's the kind of stuff which, until you actually physically show up somewhere and say, right, I'm going to make this happen, you don't need to know the how. You don't even need to know the who. You just have to have the what and the when. And if you have the what and the when, it's like, this is what I'm going to do, this is when I'm going to do it. And then you put yourself out of your comfort zone to do it. There's always a way. That's my belief. And I think belief is 9/10 of all of it in the first place.
That's amazing. So the question everyone wants to know, Roger, and I've always been fascinated by you. You're always at the front of the spear and the curves, etc., of different trends that are happening around the world. And one thing that I think most of us have a problem with, all of us actually, is information overload. You can go on YouTube, Facebook, there's millions of websites, but it's knowing which ones are the important ones. And often people get caught up in their day-to-day lives, and they miss those trends. I mean, literally, it can be anything from, when I was now just in Shanghai, and you just see millions of people on the road, and they're all wealthy, and they all got cell phones, and it's like, I just sit there and I go, every single one of them will be a potential client. But my question for everyone online tonight, and one of the things that we really wanted to spend a bit of time on, and I know that you've actually just done a webinar, and we can share the link. I'll share the link with everyone. But what are some of the top trends that you're seeing around the world that people need to be aware of, that are going to impact them whether they like it or not? And if they kind of choose to focus on it, they can really use it to their advantage, and or it's going to disrupt them whether they like it or not, and it could actually be painful.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of the biggest. I mean, your point there is actually one of the trends, right? I mean, we have gone through a 10-year cycle, and one of the things I was showing in my webinar is the fact that every 10 years something kind of weird happens, which is we get to the number 7, right? Like if you actually go back to 2007, that was the global financial crisis. And if you go back to 1997, that was the Asian crisis. You can go back to 1987, and that was Black Monday and the Wall Street crash. And you think, well, what's going on with the 7s if this happens? 7's meant to be a lucky number. But it actually is also something interesting that's happening in each of those years as well, because in 1987, when there was a Wall Street crash, that was also the time when Forbes said, hey, there seems to be this new phenomenon of global billionaires. Let's set up a global billionaires list. And that was the beginning of the global Forbes list. In the same year, you have the crash. 1997 was when people started recognizing the internet was something that was going to take off. And suddenly you had like the Netscapes, and you had the AOLs all start, and Amazon all start. And similarly, 2007, which is when we had the global financial crisis, happens to be the same year that the iPhone got launched. and no one would have imagined that 10 years later we're all accessing the internet via mobile. So there's no question in the next year. I mean, we already see it. I mean, anyone who's listening who's got money, you know how much more uncertain the markets are right now. And so as a result of that, you know, a lot of people are reorganizing their assets at the moment. And there's no question there's going to be a disruption that's going to happen. And then at the same time, you've also got a pretty massive shift that's happening on platform, which is moving away from mobile. And it's moving towards touchscreen, it's moving towards virtual reality, it's moving towards sensors and connection to the internet, which has nothing to do with looking at a phone. And there's many people who already believe that by 2020, most of us won't actually even hold a phone. There'll be no reason to hold a phone any more than if I was to tell you in 1997 that within a couple of years you won't be having a pager. People would have said, are you crazy? Everyone had pagers in 1997. So there's some really, or a Walkman, right? It's like, of course we'll have a Walkman. So there's like these like devices we have today that we just assume we're going to always have, when if you think 10 years ago we didn't have them. There were no smartphones 10 years ago. So on the one hand, you know, one of the biggest trends is the shift in platform, and being aware of that's really important, because everything has gone into social connections where very few people go and do Google search, because we're more likely to ask people via social media for advice and for support. That's a challenge for anyone selling anything. So if you think about it, right, how many people got onto Uber by Googling Uber, right? You don't, right? You get onto it because some friend told you about it, and you go straight to the App Store and you download it and you got it, right? So, so the same, that's going to happen with property, for example, right? It's going to happen with investments in businesses. It's going to happen with how you find a mentor. These are all things that are going to happen as a result, not of just social connections connecting to someone, but actually now much more purpose-driven communities, which is already starting to happen with the likes of Slack and others, which start to come together. Wealth Migrate is a good example of that, where people actually say, well, I don't have to go everywhere. I'll just go to this platform, because this platform will actually give me what I need, and it will give me immediately what I need. That leads to a second thing. I'll just do two at the moment, because there's many we could go into. But a second thing which links directly into that, and I know this is something that you guys are doing, it's something we're doing as well on our education platform, is where's artificial intelligence going? You know, you've got the likes of people like Elon Musk, you've got the likes of people like Bill Gates and even Stephen Hawking saying artificial intelligence is going to get so powerful, it's going to be dangerous unless we actually harness it properly. At the moment, artificial intelligence is all backward looking. So what does that mean? It means right now, you will not yet find a site that you can go to if you've bought a bunch of properties or if you run a bunch of businesses, and basically it will tell you what's the next property you should buy based on what you bought, or what's the next business you should start based on your last businesses. It won't tell you that. It won't even tell you what's the next job you should have based on your resume. So why can't it do that when it can tell you what book you should read based on your past books? And the reason it can't do that is because things like books or things like Facebook posts that you like are very linear, where you have a rough expectation that based on the fact that this person bought those 5 books, here might be the next book they might want to read. You can't look at someone who just had 5 jobs where they might have hated the job and say, well then, given that they had 5 jobs, this is probably the next job they should have, which are like the other ones, because we as humans want to grow and progress. So there's a shift happening in artificial intelligence, going from backward AI, where it's looking at what was this person's past habits, let's give them more of the same, to forward AI, which is not where were they, but where do they actually want to go. So any investor, any entrepreneur, any employee even, they're not looking backwards to say, give me more of the same. They're looking forward to say, well, I've done that. Now what's the next thing? And we all know that the next thing is something we probably don't even know ourselves until it shows up or until we get guided to it. And that's a very different type of artificial intelligence. So how we do that right now is we do it through assessments. So when we have things like the passion test or the genius test, wealth dynamics, we have things like the purpose test we're launching right now, which links people to the 17 United Nations global goals. So if someone goes, oh, look at that, I found out I've got a real passion for travel. Didn't really think about that. Haven't been traveling much, but that is a passion. So you wouldn't look at their past history and see they've been traveling, but they've got a passion for travel. I've got a purpose, which is education. Haven't done anything for education right now, but I've always wanted to do something with it, and now I know. I've got a small business right now that's here in Johannesburg, and it's like, at the moment, just a little transportation company. So you're sitting there with this, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, if that's what you are, and you actually have these different purposes, we're going to connect you with this person here who's in Johannesburg, who happens to also have a passion for education that you can work with, and at the same time, they're going on a trip, and because you love to travel, you should go on that trip with them. That's artificial intelligence, forward-facing. That's where we're going, which is not information, it's direction. It's not give me the whole map and all the streets. It's where am I at, where am I going, where's A, where's B? Because we don't need more information. We've got it on our phones. We need direction, which comes from actually knowing where we are and where we're going to. And that's probably one of the biggest trends. Personalizing so that your business is focusing at a market of one, right? That you're so personalized. I know Facebook works for me because it actually said, what is it that Roger would like to see when he comes to Facebook? And they actually answered that question, not for me personally, but for everyone like a Roger. And so as a result, I get what I want when I go there. You'll get all the customers you want when someone basically goes to it and says, What's Migrate is actually treating me as a market of one. And because of my history and where I want to go and what I've said, the guy in China you mentioned, right? It's like, okay, so a million, and what do you want to invest in? Where do you want to invest? You type all that stuff in, put all that together, and then boom, he gets what he wants the first time around. He'll be telling all his friends, and the whole thing will then grow through personalization and through the power of one, right? So those are two trends which are both not there yet. We don't have them today, but in the next 10 years, they're going to both be huge.
Tell me just a little bit about something you spoke of when we were in Bali together with the team, about how commerce has kind of gone, through the realm, and we've now got kind of e-commerce, and then you've got social media, and the two are actually marrying together to create social commerce. What's your understanding of that, basically?
Yeah, so that's a really important one, because if you take the whole concept of social media, where what we mostly see when we go to Facebook or when we go to Twitter is we're seeing the things that our friends want us to see, or the things that we want our friends to show us, and very rarely is it things that are necessarily going to be educational, or I don't know if anyone's ever gone to Facebook and found an investment opportunity, for example, right? So it's not something that's going to necessarily progress your life, but it does create conversation. When we go looking to buy something, if you take something like what Amazon's doing right now, Amazon starts by saying, well, let's let people rate things so that if something's rated higher, then it will show up as more of a favorite because it's getting rated higher. So now you're bringing in more of a social aspect to what you're going to buy. And it's still in very early stages, but you take that one step further, and you get to a point where, let's say, for example, someone is selling a property. And the person who's selling a property, you're not just saying, is this a good property to buy based on its past history? You're saying, is this a good person to buy from based on that person's history? So social commerce, what it looks like is you're buying as much the product, you're buying as much from the person as you are from the product. And the only way that can happen is, like, for example, if I go right now and I'm looking for someone that's going to do good web design for me, I can go to something like Upwork. I can go in there. I can actually, just solicit for work, saying, I need a web designer who can help out. Or I might go into the people that can do web design, and I look and see, well, what's their past history? What have they done? And those are pretty standard things. But to be able to go in and actually now say, well, like, who's trusted the most here? Who's actually got the most ratings because they've actually done really good web design? And how can I look at people in my neighborhood or my friends who are actually rating the person the most? And who do they rate the most? And so you find discoverability through trust, where trust comes from people saying, this is who you should work with. And people, as a result of that, will then basically say, hey, you know what? There's a consequence for me not being a good person to work with. The property market, as you know, all around the world has the challenge with people that can just disappear off after ripping people off. And it's such a difficult thing for any of us who want to go and invest, because we know that it's as much to do with building trust with the right people. And building trust is very, very slow if you've got to do it over a long period of time from scratch. It's very, very fast if you can actually leverage the social connections of your people that you trust, and then you can very quickly find the other people as well, provided you've got a platform that allows you to do that. So social commerce is really the future because it allows us to accelerate our ability to do business, because it accelerates the whole process by which we build trust in the first place.
No, I must admit, I really, when you explained that, I really, really enjoyed that. I think you might have already answered this next question. Why do you live in Bali? You mentioned it in terms of, how you got out there, etc. Is there anything else that you would share with people as to why you and your family chose Bali?
Definitely. And just so everyone knows, the second place I've chosen is South Africa. Because what we did when we got to Bali and we had this vision of this resort is we turned it into an entrepreneur resort. So we run 2-week and 4-week iLabs, right? iLab is Bali spelled backwards, and it basically is an accelerator program where people come and actually redesign what they're doing with their lives so they've got a business that serves them. And we have people from all around the world that come for this thing. And when we started it, like, there's no way when we started we could have filled it up because, number one, Bali didn't really have good internet at all, and secondly, it was still expensive to fly here. But I just had this theory that as time goes on and connectivity grows, all the paradise spots in the world will become more and more accessible. And when that happens, why would someone sit in a city when they can quite easily move out of the city, even if it's just for a couple of weeks, and experience a place where they can be far more productive and just as connected. So that was a theory, and it's pretty much panned out that being here in Bali, we now have our programs where when people come for the programs, we see at least a quarter of the people who come end up living in Bali. They don't even go back. And that's because they realize that the cost of living is so low, the lifestyle is so great, their productivity goes up, their family like it more. So that's one of the big reasons that I came here with my family, is that my kids were really young when we first got here, and they've now grown up and all going off to university. And then on top of what we were doing with Bali, and as it filled up, it became really clear that there was this demand all over the world. And we said, well, we really want to create an experience, so where would be a second place that wasn't the same as Bali, just not another paradise island? And that's when we thought, well, why don't we go to South Africa and actually have a resort where that resort would then be also a safari and also an entrepreneur resort. So we're in the process of doing that right now, so that I'll be spending some time in our resort in Bali, some time in our resort in South Africa. And then the goal is that we'll be doing this in a series of other cities as well, it's countries as well, where we'll be having a series of entrepreneur resorts there too. But for me, it really is all about if you're living in a place where you can't complain, because complaining is the number one thing that saps your energy and puts you off the certainty of what you should be doing, right? So if you have any reason, if you think, anyone listening, in the last week did I complain about anything? If you complained about anything, then you really need to change what you're doing, because you're robbing yourself of your true potential. And the only way to do that is to put yourself where you would be that there would be no reason to complain, right? So for me, that's Bali, right? It's like, I've got no reason to complain here. If I come to South Africa, I have no reason to complain there. When we first moved to Singapore, it was really interesting, because in Singapore, when we first got there, myself and Renata, and we just had Kathleen, our youngest daughter at the time, when we got to Singapore, we loved the place because we chose to be there out of all the places that were there. All the friends we had, almost without question, just complained about the place the whole time. And we couldn't understand why for a while. It's like, why are we complaining about this place? But then we found out why. It's because most of them got positioned there as an expat in a job where they would say, well, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the job. And that's when we realized how important it is to never put yourself in a situation where you become the victim. There are people, by the way, in South Africa, I'm sure there's people listening who actually complain about South Africa, right? And the people that we came in February, and we brought a whole bunch of people from around the world who just love South Africa. And they're like, how can people complain about this place? You can complain about any place if you want to, because it's not about the place. It's about your choices that you make to take full responsibility for where you are, and to say, well, if I wanted to be somewhere else, I could actually do it. So why don't I'd be happy where I am, or physically move to where I want to be.
Yeah, look, I have to say, after 3 weeks in China, getting home on Sunday last week, to just have space and freedom and take my son out on the boat to the beach, I was like, wow, you cannot complain about living in South Africa. And the fact that our lifestyle, in China would probably cost about 50 million US. So I think you might have even alluded to this question. We preempted a few of these actually. How do you build a global company? And I think you actually answered it. You said it's easier to build a global company than it is to build a local one, and also book yourself on a one-way holiday.
I think that's one part of it. I think there's another part which is very important. And I think the second part which is really important is understanding that if you're going to be global, you have to be multi-location and multi-language. A lot of people kind of don't take that next step, which is multi-language. So one of the first things we did as we were going global was we had a partner in Japan, and then we had to figure out how do we do all of this in Japan and, in Japanese, and how do we do all this in Chinese. But the moment we did that, we suddenly realized, oh my gosh, our sales have just gone up like crazy, because we have all these products like our assessments, and we have all these, like I'd show up at like an event in Tokyo and the room would be full, and you just suddenly realize, like exactly as you did, you go to China and suddenly there's these people that show up there, and you realize that perspective is the number one key asset that any entrepreneur or investor has to have. The biggest killer to your business or your investments is you get too close to it. And the only way to not be so close is to step back and to actually see things from a different point of view, and to see other options and other possibilities. And then you don't get so attached to what's going on, and you can actually see it a bit more logically and dispassionately, as you would when you look at someone else's business, and you can say, well, I could see how I could actually solve their problems right now. But when you're in the middle of it, it's very difficult to see that. So I think one of the most important things about the whole concept of being global is it immediately makes you think, well, I can't do it all myself then. A lot of people, they think, well, I've got to do everything myself, just because they're still thinking it all shows up on their desk or on their desktop. without realizing, well, wait, if I'm actually working in Japanese, I can't be doing this. I don't speak Japanese. So how do I actually translate what we're doing to another partner? Oh, that means I need to tell them now that we have a culture in our company. So what's the culture? I've got to tell them that we've got a mission in the company. What's the mission? I've got to explain what our brand actually stands for. Well, what does it stand for? The moment you have to explain who you are to someone else, you then end up articulating it in a way that's actually very valuable for yourself as well. So the key thing around how do you become a global company is you start by basically saying, well, how would I describe what I'm doing if I wasn't here? And that actually is one of the best things you can do in terms of actually detaching yourself from the company and building a team and building partnerships, which is all part of it as well. Most people, they think, well, I can't do it because I've got to do it all myself, without realizing, well, if the question was, how do I do it when it's not me doing it, then you can actually solve those challenges very quickly.
No. There's a good question here from Anton. He said, what will the best global business to start in today's time with the least amount of money, and can you give an example of such a business?
We are now living in a time where any business can be started and made profitable if you take the right steps. So it's not about the vehicle, right? So it's a little bit like saying, which car is going to be the best for me to drive, right? That's really like, I mean, there was a time when there was like Model T Ford, there's a few cars, and so you could just like, go do this business, like go start an internet business, right? But today it's like there's every choice. So saying what business is the best business to start is like saying, you know, what country is the best country to be in, or what company is the best company to be in. The number one company that you should be looking to run and to grow is one that you're really passionate about, and which is aligned to something that's meaningful to you, and that at the same time is going to give you the lifestyle that you want. That's the most important thing. And the very first place to start isn't with the product. It isn't with your location. It's by saying, who would be my perfect customer, that if that customer was showing up unhappy every day, I'd still be happy to serve them because I love that customer, right? And if you start from that place to say, who would that be, then you can actually find that business very quickly. So I'll give you an example, right? So we had, someone who came to us at iLab, and she had a business in health, and she was really, she had some customers, she was just getting started. She said she wanted a lot more business customers in health, and she said, no, my perfect customer is someone who actually really wants to support their health, and that's my passion, that's what I want to do, but I can't make money out of it right now because I can only charge so much for my consultation time. And I said, well, it's not about your consultation time, it's about what kind of partner do you want to be. It turns out that she's a supporter profile. Supporter profile is someone who's very good with people. I said, so you shouldn't be trying to create a product at all, you should be connected to someone who's got a great product. So who out there could you think of who's got a great product that you can partner with, and then you can actually take that product and take it to your customers. So she worked that out. Now she's got a business that's growing really great, and it's all as a result of just asking the right questions to be able to actually move forward with something that's in your flow and that actually is naturally suited to you in the first place, rather than you trying to suit yourself to the business.
That's very good advice. Is that Joe, by the way, or was it someone else?
Yeah, that was Joe.
I think I'm my worst client. With all the global traveling, I really struggle to eat all the healthy stuff and take all the right pills at the right time. So listen, just one that I'm always fascinated by is, how do you manage risk within this changing environment? Whether it's global trends, whether it's different countries, different businesses, how do you manage risk within that?
I think there's I think that there is three different answers to that, right? I'll take the first like nuts and bolts answer. So the first nuts and bolts answer is just pure cash, right? I think one of the biggest things that have caught many people short in the last 10 or 15 years is they just ran out of cash. And that includes some people that actually have a lot of assets. There was a time when you could actually say that markets, capital markets, whether it's property or whether it's stocks and shares, that capital markets, even currencies, right? Capital markets were not as volatile as they are today. So while they would move, they'd move slowly. There was more signs that they were going to move. And then as a result, you could kind of prepare for them. And it doesn't mean people weren't caught short in the past. They have been. But there's no question people get more caught out now than ever. So the number of people I work with who are just like, at some point in the last 10, 15 years, they were just super successful, and then it all just disappeared. And they were like, what happened there? And that happens because they didn't put cash flow first. So how do we put cash flow first in our business, for example? We start by saying, how do we minimize our overheads? How do we make as much as what we do outsourced? How do we make as much as what we do systematized? How do we do it so that we reduce the total amount so that if we don't bring in as much revenues, we're actually okay? And then once we know what that number is, how do we make sure we create that to be as automatic as possible? So you're going to talk about evergreen products, so like there's a very big difference having someone coming in and paying you once and having to go out for someone else paying you once, as opposed to having people come in and they're just paying you every single month. And so like understanding that all the most successful businesses today have got people paying them on a regular basis, and every time they find a customer, the lifetime value of that customer is longer. That's all about the strategy and model of your business, such that if we ended up bringing in no new sales in any particular month in any of my businesses, they'd still be fine because there's enough ongoing cash flow to cover all the overheads anyway. So that's a mindset. By the way, that's a Richard Branson mindset as well. He started by saying, I don't ever want to get into a business where if we have a bad month, that's going to jeopardize the business. Too many people I know have not designed their business for preparing for the fact that might happen. So they're preparing for the best as opposed to preparing for the worst. That's the first thing, which then frees up your time, right? The second thing, outside of the pure cash and the model, which is the first thing to get in place, the second thing is to make sure that I'm doing what's right for me. Because if I'm doing what's right for me, I'm not a liability to the business, which means every day has got to be the day as it would be, whether the business is going well or going badly. What I'm doing with my time is still the right thing with my time. Like if I had certain days where I like begrudged a day because I couldn't exercise, because I couldn't see my family, because I couldn't, do the things I love to do, I would be a liability for the business. And too many people I see are becoming a slave to their business and then blaming the business through their stress for their lifestyle and where they're at. So the second thing about managing risk is knowing that the biggest risk in your business is yourself. So you've got to manage yourself. And if you do that right, and you're always an asset to the business, you'll always be thinking clearly, because there's no question that the biggest risk to your business is, as the leader or as the founder, you stop thinking clearly. That's the biggest risk, because think about it. It doesn't matter what's going on in the economy. It doesn't matter what's happening internally in your business. If there was someone far clearer, more clearer-minded than you, or more expert than you, coming in to take over your place tomorrow, that business would be in a whole different space. It's the same for all of us, right? So I'm constantly asking that question, what do I need to do to be a better version of myself? That takes the risk away. And then there's a third element, which is all about people. And that third element is basically saying, how do we, like you're starting with the whole point that that your business is going to get disrupted. So if you know your business is going to get disrupted, and asking the question, what if my business was out of business within a year of now? And what if I was out of a job a year from now? What would I do differently today? So within our team and within our partnerships, we ask that on a regular basis, right? We have quarterly meetings. We say, let's imagine that all our customers disappeared. Let's imagine that all of our products were no longer selling. What would we do differently? And asking that question goes from resource dependent, where you're depending on the bank loan or depending on your customer. You go from resource dependent to resourceful, which is where you're actually saying, well, you've already got a solution for that and you've already got a plan B, which allows you to then implement plan A even more effectively. So that's all about basically hedging from the outside to make yourself more valuable. It's like putting training wheels on so you can't fall over on the bike, and understanding that if you don't take the time to do those elements where you're saying, well, what happens if it does go wrong, then there's every likelihood it actually will go wrong. And when it happens, then it's going to be the ill-prepared who are the ones who actually fail. So risk, R-I-S-K, I say, is a reaction to incomplete or summary knowledge. Like you get a pilot who gets on a plane, he doesn't know how to fly the plane. It doesn't matter how many planes he flies, he's never going to find one that's not risky, because it's not the plane that's risky, it's the pilot that's risky. He's got incomplete or summary knowledge of how to fly a plane, and so as a result, he's the greatest risk of all.
Tony, we get the privilege of meeting people, and I know you've even got the entire spectrum, which you talk a lot about in your book, from really people that don't have a lot of money right through to really wealthy people. But what are one or two things that really distinguish wealthy people from the rest, in your opinion?
That's a really interesting question, because
and just for the record, you guys can probably see that Roger and I haven't prepared these questions.
No, yeah, but they're great questions. But I think it's a really interesting question because I've seen many people go through the spectrum. I mean, I've seen people that have had plenty of wealth and then they lose it all. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of mindset, because I mean, we haven't really talked about it on this call, but the Millionaire Master Plan book that you mentioned have got the 9 different levels of wealth. And so, for example, there's one level, blue level, which is called the conductor, which is a person who's got multiple streams, got multiple investments, lots of cash coming in, millions that they can actually reallocate. And there's a certain and it's all about the balance sheet, but it's also about balance in that every time I meet anyone who's at blue level, they're never driving themselves like crazy. They're probably achieving everything they need to achieve business-wise and wealth-wise with maybe 20% of their time. They can easily accelerate out of a problem if it happens, but they're not trying to rush and push hard as someone who's just getting started. But then let's say I've seen quite a lot of people who've been at that level, and they're very comfortable. They're looking around at everything. They've got the luxury of this taking longer to decide. They'll have more opportunities than they actually are even interested in. So there'll be people knocking on the door and won't even be able to get through the door. But they'll just be kind of checking it out. People saying, "Can you give me an answer?" And say, "I'll get back to you." Right? They're the ones that basically are kind of in cruise control. But if someone like that, and I've seen many of them sell their business, I'm going to sell my business, I'm going to go do something bigger now. I'm going to sell all my properties, I'm going to go do something different. And they get out of flow, and they go into negative cash flow, which is what I call infrared, which is someone who goes into more and more debt. Even if they've got millions of dollars, they kind of like sell their business and they're ready for the next thing, and they suddenly get detached from all of that flow and the momentum, and they lose all their confidence. And I've seen that happen often. And they're like, what do I do now? And suddenly they think that they have to look introspectively and say, what just happened to me where everything was going great and I was on top of the world, and now suddenly I didn't even know how to make a decision anymore. And so this isn't about how much wealth you've got even. It's about basically how connected to flow you actually are. And if you're at that point, then you're suddenly in a really needy position and it's all about self-worth. It's like, holy cow, I'm actually sapping out this world I live in because I'm actually a net negative every single month, as opposed to a big net positive because of all my assets working for me. And understanding that difference, you say, well, what's the biggest difference of someone who's wealthy or someone who's higher up compared to someone who is lower down? It's basically, again, coming back down to the word trust, but trust, which is the link of internal and external trust. So there's an external trust called credibility. And when you're basically running multiple companies and you show up and people can see that you're very successful, you walk in with that credibility. Even if you sell something and you start from scratch again, suddenly that credibility can disappear altogether. And so suddenly that trust is not there, that people are suddenly willing to give it money to you anymore. Go to the bank when you've got all these assets and they're happy that, they're throwing money at you, suddenly you're starting fresh and they're not even returning your calls anymore. So that's one thing, credibility, which is external trust. That links directly to confidence, which is internal trust. And confidence is where, your own confidence in your own ability to do things. It's very easy to lose that if you don't have the two of them linked together. And then when they show up? They show up in certainty. Because when you're higher up, people have very high levels of certainty. The moment you get a knock in your confidence or in your credibility, then your certainty goes down as well. And so the biggest number one thing that I see in people that are at a high level of wealth consciousness to people who aren't is their level of certainty, and not certainty in the markets, because in both cases, they don't know what's going to happen in the market, but certainty like a sailor in the sea, where you're certain no matter what the weather throws at you or what the sea throws at you, you're going to be fine, because it's not certainty in the external conditions, it's certainty in your ability to navigate those external conditions. Hope that came across, but that is like the number one thing that not only do you need to have, it's the number one thing that when you do have as an investor or an entrepreneur, attracts other investors or other entrepreneurs to you, just like if you're certain when you kick a ball in football, it's going to go in, or if you're playing rugby and you're certain you can score the try, people want you on their team because that certainty is what wins the game.
Yep. No, it's it's very, very true actually, and it's at the end of the day, people want to back winners. Tell me something in terms of the mindset. What we've spoken. I'm going to actually skip over this question because I think we've been through this already. Where you spoke a lot about the global citizen and having a global mindset. So I think I'm just going to jump past this question unless there's anything you want to add there quickly.
No, I think we pretty much covered that one on mindset. It is a real challenge for most people because mindset is like a cold, right? It's not something that you can internalize. It's something you need to catch from someone else, right? So you can't kind of say, how do I change my mindset, and ask yourself that question. You got to just be around other people with that same mindset, and then you'll just catch it. And that's where most people go wrong, is that they're in the wrong environment with people with the wrong mindset anyway, trying to change their own mindset.
Tell me something, Roger. You've traveled all over the world. You continue to travel all over the world. I know you're spending a lot of time in South Africa. As you said, you've just bought a resort out here, so you're probably more committed to South Africa than most South Africans right now. But a question I get asked all the time is, can wealthy people still live in South Africa but invest globally? So, the old days you had to actually immigrate to Australia and go and live there, whereas nowadays, I believe you can live in where you want to live and ultimately invest anywhere. What's your understanding of, not just from South Africa necessarily, but at a global level as well?
Well, it's getting easier and easier. I mean, like if you were to go back to the 1980s, or even, to be honest, like early 1990s, and you were in South Africa and you wanted to invest in the New York Stock Exchange, difficult to do. You'd have to basically go out there. You'd have to get yourself a broker. You'd have to make sure that you were around to sign the paperwork every time that you actually did a trade. Right? That was difficult times, and it would be impossible for you to do that, which is why you had all these localized bourses around the world. Today it's easy because you've actually got online exchanges which allow you to do that very, very easily. However, until very recently, you didn't have that for other asset classes. You didn't have it for property. It was very difficult to do that if you wanted to invest in startups, for example, around the world. That's becoming easier and easier. So it's really, we're in one of the most exciting times at the moment because you're taking all asset classes, and there are a couple of things happening with them. One thing that's happening with them is that you are seeing now all around the world new platforms like Migrate launching, which allows someone in China to invest outside. China has a lot more challenge with people investing outside China than people in South Africa have investing outside South Africa. Yet they're still finding ways to do it. So there's always a way once you've got the right platforms in place, and that liquidity and that flow continues to grow. And then there's other things which I'm not sure if we have time to get into right now, but we will totally transform the property market. You know, things like the growth of digital currencies and blockchain will change everything. And then that actually, they'll change things as much as Uber is changing. Uber and driverless cars is changing the entire auto market with the property market too. But as a result of that, you don't have to physically go to another part of the world to be able to invest. And with the likes of virtual reality coming, where you're going to be able to even go tour a house that you want to buy anywhere in the world, or tour an office that you want to actually invest in a startup anywhere in the world, it's becoming easier and easier to choose to live anywhere, including South Africa, and then be a global investor.
It's actually quite exciting, and I look forward to when I see you face to face. I can show you just some of the stuff that we're doing on the digital side of things, and linking into what you mentioned with digital exchanges and blockchain. There's some really deep work and that our team is doing to enable that. So, exciting times ahead, I think.
Absolutely.
What is the best way to create wealth in the global economy? And I think, you actually answered this from Anton's question where he said, what is the best global business? But, I think everyone's always, particularly when they're in the emerging market, trying to figure out how to kind of create first world assets that create first world income. And I mean, you've very much strongly come across today in terms of focusing on cash flow. I always find the wealthiest people always focus on income, whereas the unsophisticated people tend to focus on capital growth. But any thoughts on creating wealth in the global economy that you haven't shared already?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I'm going to give you and everyone listening an example of this, right? So here's an example. I mean, when I came out last year to South Africa, I'd met up with a lot of investors as well as entrepreneurs, and people were saying, well, like things are tough in South Africa. The rand has dropped against the US dollar and so on. I said, well, it depends which way you look, right? If you've got a very limited network of people where everyone that you know all are victims feeling they're victims in South Africa, you'll miss the point that this is the very best time for people outside of South Africa to invest in South Africa. And I said, look, we're buying a resort in South Africa, and for us it's great, right? Like we get the resort on a 30% discount because the rand has dropped. So we're in buying a resort and we're raising the funds and we're putting it all together to get this resort. And then and they're going, oh, but safari resorts don't make money. It's like, no, because we've actually got a model where we actually invite people from around the world to come out and actually be part of this. We control the cash flow. So it doesn't matter the resort that we're buying. If it's not full, we'll make it full because we've actually got the control on the flow in the front end. And so off the back of that, I then had people from South Africa who said, well, what will it look like? So I showed them the model and they went, oh, you actually are going to be able to make money from all of this. And I said, yeah, and look, we're getting investment in as well. They go, well, we wish we could invest in that. And we're like, well, you can invest in this. And he goes, well, we want our money to be out of rand. It's like, well, if you want the money to be out of rand, we're actually buying this as a Singapore company. It's a US dollar company. We've got a title on the lease that we're buying it on. As we buy it, you can buy shares in the Singapore company. So we can take our money out of South Africa, get it and invest it into an offshore company, and then invest back into cash-generating asset in South Africa. And I said, yes, and even more so, there are more people who want to come to South Africa than other places because the rand is cheap, which means that you're actually now really, jumping onto the entire entrepreneur and tourism market together. Now, that whole cycle could only happen because, and we've actually got quite a few South African investors now investing with us because of that cycle, but it can only happen because they are themselves connecting with people like us who are in different countries who are seeing things from a different perspective. So what I said earlier, having a global mindset is important from the point of view of entrepreneurship. It's as important from the point of view of investing, because now here's a situation where we have people in South Africa investing in South Africa when they had already committed to themselves, we don't want to invest in South Africa anymore. But it's because of the model and the structure which then makes sense to do it and gives them a better return than they could be doing on their own by just going out and buying property in South Africa. And understanding that model, which has nothing to do with South Africa and everything to do with understanding how flow works and understanding how capital can grow if it's designed and structured in the right way to minimize risk and at the same time to be able to support enterprise. So that's what I say in terms of what's the best way to create wealth in a global economy is not just have a global network of entrepreneurs you can learn from, is to have a global network of investors that you can learn from as well, where you're all learning from each other what's working, which you may not even have known was even possible in the first place.
Oh, that's awesome. We had the privilege just this weekend with our wealth partners. We had over 50 people at our AGM and a dinner, and just so great, such gratitude to have people not just from South Africa, from around the world. And so, I very much understand what you're talking about, and it's that whole power of community as well that is so important.
Yeah.
Tell me, one of the things that I've learned is that obviously from business is, entrepreneurship, and it's easier to make money there. But what do you see that people invested in? At the end of the day, they make money out of their business, but what do you see that they invested in around the world? Are there any trends that you picked up on that?
We're living in a very, very weird time where assets are being devalued radically, right? I mean, I still remember growing up in the 1980s in the kind of Thatcher Britain where there was this kind of it was all in vogue to own your own house, right? So what does that do? It actually means there's a demand for more properties and everyone goes into the housing market and inflates the housing market. Today, millennials don't want to buy their own house, right? It's why would I buy if I can just rent or I can just use Airbnb when I'm traveling? And so, same with cars, right? Why would I buy a car if I can just, the founder of Didi, he doesn't even, he's 32 years old now. He's got a company that Apple's just put $1 billion into. Didi is 7 times the size of Uber, and he can't even drive, right? And he says, well, I don't want to drive because that means I've got to have a car, and I don't want a car because I want to use my own service to just share other people's cars. So that's a mindset where suddenly people don't have as much interest in owning assets anymore. And so as a result of that, you then got a question mark, which is where does all this money flow to, given that there is all this money flowing around the world, and it's looking for a return in some way. And for me, what's really interesting, what I see, is people are actually spoiled for choice when it comes to where they could park their money. However, it's actually more uncertain than ever what kind of guaranteed return you can get, which is why so many people are just into treasuries and bonds, because they're we don't know where to put the money, where it might just disappear altogether. And so what that actually means is that I'm seeing more and more investors who are investing not with the first primary thing, return on investment. They're I could get return here, I can get return there. But it's really not so much what's my return on investment, it's more what's my fulfillment on investment. I'm seeing more and more people investing in things where they get more fulfillment out of it, right? They might invest in a company because it excites them to see what happens at the board meetings when they meet up with the company. It might be investing in properties which are in other countries, which allows them to go and visit those other countries. But there's certainly more than simply, what's the hard 10%, 15%, 20% I'm getting on my money. It's much more now, what's the experience I'm getting with that money actually going into those investments. And I think that's a really massive shift that's continuing. I don't think it's over. It's going to continue. And I think there's going to be people investing in things where even if they lose the money, they're actually okay with it because they've got a return just from the experience of actually putting the money into that. And I see that with a lot of venture capital firms. I've seen quite a few VCs who are loving what they do, and they're still yet to show a great return. But they wouldn't stop it, and they certainly wouldn't take the money out from what they're doing and put it in the bank instead, because it's part of the entire experience that they're having of using that skill set they're growing to build the lifestyle they really want to have and the kind of experiences they want to be a part of as well. So I think that's going to continue. I look as much at what is fulfillment on return as I do as what's fulfillment on investment as I do as what's return on investment. And I think that a lot of people listening will resonate with that as well. It's not just investors doing that; it's also entrepreneurs doing that. Entrepreneurs tend to invest their time more than they invest their money. So again, it's am I getting a return on my time? Isn't so much how much getting paid. It's am I getting fulfillment on my time? Am I actually doing something I love? And I see that's going to continue. And the fulfillment's not just in terms of your lifestyle or your passion. It's also what impact are you having in the world. And so I'm seeing a lot more impact investors that are saying, if I can put money towards something that's going to make a difference in the world, then I'm going to go do that. And it doesn't mean people want to lose their money, but it's less important how much like hard cash they make out of every dollar that they put in than it used to be in the past.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You introduced me to Peg, and I remember when we came up with the wealth movement actually in Bali with you on how we can empower 1 billion people, and he was like, I'm not interested, tell me how much return we're going to make on our money. And yet in America, we actually had a call just last week, and they weren't even interested in the pitch deck and everything. They were like, what's your purpose? Well, how are you going to change the world? It was just interesting, like the different mindsets,
That's right.
So where do you see opportunity around the world? You've spoken about, you actually dropped it in a little bit with entrepreneurship and tourism and stuff. What are some of the opportunities you see sitting around the world at the moment?
For me, I think there's a number of different areas where opportunity is growing. Frankly, Africa together with Asia are the two areas which already you can see from the projections are going to be growing the most rapidly. And it's very interesting because I remember when people were saying that about Asia in the early 2000s, around about the kind of dot-com bust time, and I was like, what, are you kidding me? Like this place here is like, it's just still trying to recover from the Asian crisis. And but there's no question that at that point, if anyone was in Asia and starting a business, they'd be doing very, very well right now. And that's because there is this massive growth in both areas of not just what's going on with entrepreneurship, but also what's going on in connectivity, right? We're seeing that in Africa, we're seeing that in Asia. We're at 4 billion people, 3 billion people online right now. That's going up to 7. And about 90% of all that growth isn't happening in Europe or in America. It's all happening in the developing world. So that is huge in terms of geography, and all the more reason that those who are in South Africa should be looking at where the guy, not at everyone, because there's going to always be people that are having challenges, and definitely not looking at the government for solutions, but looking at where are the people that are the up-and-coming guys that are really making things happen, and go connect up with them, and you'll find amazing stuff happen. And I think the second area is always going to be where there's disruption, because where there's disruption, there's a shift from the old to the new. And it's really easy when you look at the old and go, gosh, like, take media, right? Media has totally collapsed in the last 10 years. And if you were still trying to hold on to your newspaper job, you'd be pretty unhappy right now. But if you actually shifted with the times, and as a result of that, are now basically, driving something new like Huffington Post, right? Then you're doing very, very well. So it's understanding what that shift is. And if anyone's sitting in the middle of a shift where you're on the wrong side of it, you can always shift to the other side. I'll give you a quick example of that. There's one of the guys that I met recently when I was in Melbourne. His name is Vaughan Clare. So I met Vaughan about 5 years ago. And when I first met him, he was at one of my Fast Forward events. He stands up at the event and he says, well, what should a person like me do, Roger? Because you're talking about all these great trends, and that's fine. But all of my experiences in mainframes, I'm currently doing a contract with the Australian Post where I'm putting in all their ERP systems. It's been like a 3-year project, which is about to finish. No one's putting these ERP systems anymore, which means I'm pretty much out of a job and I'm out of a profession because this is all I've done all my life. And I said to him, I said, well, why would no one be using ERP systems anymore? And he's like, well, because people aren't doing payment through these big systems. They're doing stuff like what's going on with PayPal and what's going on with like mobile payments. They're going down that route. And I said, well, you've got the guys, they trust you. He goes, yeah, they trust me. I said, but you don't have the expertise in how to do mobile payments. He goes, no, I don't. I said, how fast could you actually get that expertise and actually be the leader in mobile payments? And it hadn't even crossed his mind, because he saw it as a threat that this whole new technology was coming his way, that he could be leading the whole thing. And he goes, well, you're saying I should be leading it? I said, no, you don't have to lead it, but you've got amazing technical skills that if you actually put yourself out there to the guys that are leading it, then they'll take you on. He says, how do I do that? I said, it starts by you being a leading learner. And what he did was he set up a blog page and he set up a Twitter post where he just looked for things every day which was to do with mobile payments. He started posting them in Australia on his blog and on his Twitter account. Within 4 months, he had the #1 leading mobile payment company that was raising like second-round funding contact him and say, hey, we'd love to speak to you because we've been watching your blog posts and your emails you've been sending through, and we'd love to find out where you're getting all your information from. He met up with them. He told them the story about how we'd moved from one to the other. They said, well, we're looking for a CTO right now. Do you want to come and join us? He joined them. Within 6 months, he's got shares in a business that's now valued at hundreds of millions of dollars in the industry that's actually disrupted his own industry. And so this is not about saying, well, my past equals my future. If anyone's getting stuck in a situation, look at what it is that's disrupting you. Don't hold on to the wave, hold on to your surfboard. because as someone who surfs and holds onto the surfboard can always get another wave, but someone holding onto the wave is always going to end up beached, right? And you don't want that. So the waves are getting bigger, they're getting faster. So get on your surfboard, which is what you naturally do well. What's your passion? What's your purpose? And then get onto the wave that's actually the one coming. And that way, immediately, you can actually get onto the right wave doing the right thing. So there are so many different, that's why I can't just say, here's the number one opportunity. You can take anything from property through to, solving the environmental issues, through to trade with China. You can take pretty much any area of the world, and there is a disruption going on in every one of these areas. And every one of them is an opportunity as well as it being a challenge.
I love what you said about the surfboard and the wave. Growing up in Durban, what people also need to realize is that you don't sit on the beach and wait for a good wave. You actually have to paddle out to backline and trust that it's coming, and then wait for it once you're out there. And it's just everyone always sits on the beach going, oh yeah, I'll go surfing one day when there's a good wave, but it doesn't work like that, because that's been known as a tsunami and it lands on top of you. What would you recommend people do based on everything that you see going on, basically? What is one or two things that you think people should focus on?
The number one thing is to be a leading learner. The number one thing is to know that what's going to make you successful in the next 2 years will be what you learn and who you meet in the next 3 months. If you think about things that way around, rather than saying, I need to rely on my past knowledge, my past expertise, my past contacts for what's going to happen in the next 2 years, if you did away with all of it, right? It's like Apple, when they come out with iPhone 7, are not saying, well, we need to rely on iPhone 6 to create iPhone 7. They don't. They go the other way around. They say, well, what would be the ideal iPhone 7? And are there any bits of iPhone 6 we should take with us that fit into iPhone 7? We'll take those bits. The rest of it, we'll leave it behind. And so reverse engineering from the future is the number one thing that we should be thinking of doing, and realizing that the people that will beat you and overtake you are probably 20-somethings that had nothing like the expertise you have, nothing like the network you have, nothing like the knowledge you have, but it's just that they were looking at things with a fresh set of eyes to say, what would I do today in the current situation today to move forward? So this is all about unlearning, and it's all about knowing that every one of us has the same potential, as the next Mark Zuckerberg or the next Steve Jobs, if we actually come with fresh eyes and a beginner's mind, right? So that would be the number one thing. And the second thing, we've been talking about it all through this call, is to think globally, right? That's like the world has become so accessible, and people themselves have become much, much more collaborative, right? So there was a time when people thought it was great to compete with each other and hold their stories and their ideas themselves. Today, people are realizing, the only way to be able to grow forward and move forward is to actually connect with others. And what I recommend for people to do in that area is to realize that the top people in any industry, they already are meeting each other, because they know that they're actually stronger floating as a fleet than they are trying to build one big Titanic, right? And so when I got interested in the future, I looked around the world and I said, well, where are the futurists meeting? And there was a number of places in America where I just got on a plane, I flew out, and I invested the time and effort to be in front of those people, and that's led to a lot of what we're doing today. This weekend, I'm flying to Japan and then to Hong Kong, because we've got the RISE conference where I'll physically go there to be putting myself in the face of serendipity to see, well, what shows up there when you're actually at the forefront. You're at the mouth of the river, right? You're at that point where everything's just starting, and you always find amazing things you could never predict until you're there. So that would be the second thing, is actually put yourself in the face of flow, and that physically means moving from where you are to actually experience it. But find out what's the top conference you should go to, or the top mastermind group you should join, and be open to that learning.
That's awesome. And just to remind everyone, you've got your Fast Forward events here in South Africa in October, which I highly, highly recommend. We'll send out details to everyone, but I highly recommend they go to it, where you focus on the big trends happening around the world that people can really kind of get better insight into. Tell me something quickly. It's just a quick question. We have quite a fierce debate at the moment around the concept of a family office. Some people understand it, some people don't. Have you got any ideas on it? Do you understand it yourself, and what they actually do?
I do from the point of view that Asia, and especially Southeast Asia, have got many family offices. So what in particular about a family office?
No, it's just what I find really interesting is that a lot of people in the middle class, even the wealthy, don't fully understand the concept of family office. And my understanding of family office is where it's basically created to help very wealthy families, and it does. only two things, which ironically comes back to what you were talking about earlier, which is where it takes the world's data and information and opportunities and it consolidates it and it makes it very bespoke for the power of one, for that family and what that family is looking for. And then basically it helps them invest based on their needs versus kind of what most of us just have, which is here's an opportunity. We're not sure if it's actually right for me individually, but it's just available to everybody, you know?
Well, what I will share about it is I will share that what is happening with family offices is transforming fairly radically within Southeast Asia. So family offices are very common where you've got countries which basically still, they're young enough that they've got families that were there from the very beginning when the government was set up, and so they've got large tracts of land. They run a lot of the government enterprises. Thailand's full of them, Indonesia's full of them, Malaysia's full of them, and these family offices, they really are about, just like if someone individually as a wealthy person has a trust, they really are, and a lot of them are trusts, where they basically say, well, we know we're going to be passing this on. This is more than just a trust where we want to have, a series of trustees that are going to look after this. We want to treat this like a business. So we're going to have a proper, holding company that's actually then making decisions on everything else that we're investing in. And the big shift that's happening is, and I work with a lot of the kids that are part of these family offices. So often you'll have, the elder, parents who are no longer involved in it, and they're just getting cash flow from it. And they've told the kids, you run everything now. And then the kids are like, but wait, I don't actually even enjoy this company. I don't enjoy this industry. Can I make different decisions about things I'd love to do? We're investing in properties, but I want to invest in startups. What latitude do I have in that? And what we're seeing is a modernization of those family offices where they're becoming far more connected to the passion and purpose of the kids and where they want to go. And things like culture become much more important, and things like, how you're going to actually set a mission for the entire organization become much more important. And that's a really good thing, because we're seeing at the moment, I'll give you an example. We have got, in about 2 weeks' time at our resort here in Vision Villas, we have something called the Founder Coaching Course, which is basically something that you mentioned Peng earlier. Peng is someone who made his money in startups from Singapore. He became very well known because he set up Match.com in America. He cashed out on a lot of that, and then he set up a $100 million fund as a venture capital firm. And basically, he's like a lot of VCs. He has a big challenge in that he's trying to invest in startups. And he says the big challenge in Asia is, and it's the same in Africa, you've got people with money, they want to invest in startups. You have some startups that have great ideas, but they're not investable because they haven't had experience in how to scale a company. So they go, well, we want to give this guy money, but we don't believe he can scale the company. Where's his mentor? Because we don't know how to mentor him. It's not like Silicon Valley where the VCs are the mentors. So who's the mentor? And so we're working with them because we have the expertise to be mentors. So we bring it all together, and then that allows us to have investable entrepreneurs. It allows the money to get flowing to the right people more effectively. And he's seeing, as many of the VCs in Indonesia are, that a lot of the people they're going to for financing or for their funds are family offices. And so then it's about, okay, do we align in with you on what you want to achieve? And do you have a bigger mission than simply making money? Comes back to my earlier point. Are you actually trying to, improve the startup situation in Indonesia or make Indonesia competitive, fourth largest populated country in the world? Why don't we actually do something with it to make it the fourth most competitive country in the world as well? So that becomes basically more mission focused, which is happening. So there's a huge shift right now happening within family offices. I personally think it's a good thing because a lot of families in the past have held on to their money and put it into very low risk investments, which means the money gets stuck as opposed to flow through the economy, which we're starting to see more and more of at the moment.
Awesome. Last two questions. I love this saying that I heard. It's from Confucius. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. And again, the past was all about reading a book or going on a course, but whereas actually like learning while doing. And I know that exactly what you do at iLab is very much that, where people are going. It takes 4 weeks. But the point is they're really like doing it while on the go basically. And I mean, do you have any kind of thoughts on that and how there's been this shift around the world from, as an example, even Dolph, 10, 20 years ago, Dolph was standing on stage. You would pay a lot of money to come along and learn from Dolph how to invest in real estate. And now, with our inner circle, you actually have the ability to invest with Dolph and he teaches you while doing. And I know that you've been doing that very much in the entrepreneur space as well. Have you, what is that trend that you're seeing, and how is it happening?
Well, one thing for sure is that there's more and more opportunities now for people to get mentored and to learn than ever before, right? There's more, and I say that not just in terms of people joining mentoring groups or networking groups. I say it from the point of view that you could not go back 20 or 30 years and find the most successful people in the world as accessible as they are today, and also as generous as they are today. I mean, like, you can take anyone, Elon Musk, you take, Richard Branson, and these guys are all giving up their time to support others, and they're also writing stories and posting blogs and tweeting every day on the latest things they're doing. So, so basically at the moment, there's more accessibility to the strategies of what makes those successful than ever, and they're not holding back. They're sharing everything quite openly as well. So what can people do to learn and partner with wealthy people? First of all, anyone who's listening here, take the top 10 people that you actually really admire for their ability to create wealth and contribute wealth, and go follow them on Twitter today. Go onto Facebook and follow them right now today, right? So they show up on your stream. So when Richard Branson posts something and says, hey, here's what I've just done today, you see it, because you're going to learn so much by shadowing someone as if you were just sitting there with them. And most people go, I'd love to learn all this stuff, and it's there and flowing every day through social media, and we're not even looking at it, right? So that's the first thing everyone should do, and look at that instead of the news. The second thing is that if you choose the people who are the ones that you'd really love to work with, not when people don't know you, but people who will have some trust because they know of someone who knows you, and you actually are looking for what does that person need most. Even the wealthiest people in the world, there's things they need. And if there's things they're going to be involved in, things they're going to be part of, if they've got a mission they're going for, if they've got a charity they're supporting, and you find a way to be of value to what they're trying to achieve in their life, then you get time with them, right? And so, like, I've known a few entrepreneurs who got all their investors by basically going out there, and rather than going looking for investors, they went looking for what's the cause they cared about most. I have one who had a really passion for supporting orphanages, and she didn't have the money to get going with her own clinic that she wanted to set up. She goes, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go support orphanages as if I had the money. And so she went out, visited the orphanages in Vietnam. When she went and did that, she found out from the orphanage in Vietnam that there were other people in Singapore who were also supporting it, who were very wealthy. So when she went back to Singapore, she contacted them and saying, hey, I want to support this as well. Can I help you in any way? One thing led to another, and they ended up funding her business because they had an aligned purpose of where they were going. And she now runs retreats or groups that actually go out and support the orphanage as well. So start with the end in mind, right? It's like if you want to get down to the sea, find out which rivers are going the same direction you are, get connected up with that flow, and you're going to get there far more easily. That would be the two things I'd share that people can do immediately today.
That's pretty awesome. And the last question, you've spoken a lot about trends, but where do you kind of see the future of business and investing 10 years from now? Not, obviously I know you do whole day seminars on this, but just in simple terms, where do you see the future of business and investing 10 years from now?
Here's what things like, I'm going to link this to property because I know that, there's many people listening in from What's Migrate that link to property as well. I want everyone to think for a moment about what Uber is doing with cars, okay? So basically, what's happened with Uber is that they've just come out with their first driverless cars, right? They're testing them right now. So first of all, they disrupt the entire industry where you had to wait for a taxi, and if a taxi showed up, then great, you get a taxi and you get overcharged for a taxi, to one where anyone can turn their car, if they had a car, into a taxi and they'll drive you around at a fraction of the price, and you just get your Uber and then you go do that, to a point where you're not even going to have the driver, because the driver's not going to be there, and Uber's going to just supply the car, just like there's already mobile phone companies that just supply the phone. You don't have to buy the phone anymore. You can just say, I want to use it, right? And then straight away, you'll be on some kind of a plan where you get that. This is happening already. The beginnings of it is already happening when it comes to parts of our house. So for example, if you take what Solar City is doing, which is Elon Musk, they had a big challenge, which is that solar actually is more economic already than being on the grid. The challenge with it is that you actually have to install the solar to begin with. So they went and financed the whole thing where they say, no, you don't actually have to finance the solar. We'll put the solar roof on. We'll put the solar panels on. You don't have to pay for any of it. You just pay back over time. And it's effectively like rental, right, that you'll pay back over time. And if you wanted to move out and go somewhere else, you could do that too. With blockchain and what's happening with that, everyone's going to be able to do that, which means that the person manufacturing the doors will just say, I'll just put the door in, right? The property developer didn't even pay for the door. I just put the door in. It's got the little video thing on it. It's got everything like that. The people that come in and use this house, they'll just pay me. every month, and then I'll eventually make the money back, and then I'll make some profit from that as well. You take every different component of a house and you go down that route, and you're no longer having to go and build a whole house in order for someone to live in it. Everyone's going to actually have a different piece and part of it, and everyone's going to be able to get paid. And you won't even have to have someone come into the house and live in the house for a month or for a year. It'll be just like Uber, where you can just come in for a day if you wanted to. Now, if you start going down that route where you've got an entire culture where no one's homeless, everyone's got a place that they can stay, everyone's thinking at a point where you don't have to physically own an asset, but you can own a percentage of the flow. You might own a percentage of that solar company, or you might own a percentage of that door company. But if you start looking at that, it's like, what's the future of business? The future of business is all the friction goes away, and every one of us can invest directly into the flow as opposed to the physical product. Can you imagine if we actually had to all physically go out and invest in all the costs of actually producing a mobile phone and all of that in order to just throw it away in 2 years' time, right? Or recycle in 2 years' time, right? None of it will be economic. But we don't do that anymore. We're already just tapping into the flow, knowing that whatever pieces of asset that we've got actually is not about the asset. It's about the utility of it and the ability that we can then access the internet and access all that other stuff, which this asset becomes a doorway to. Property will be exactly the same in the future, where people will be actually seeing it very, very differently. And if you start thinking about that's where things are going, then you'll think very differently about how much you put into assets and how much you actually look at sharing assets with others, which is what crowdfunding is all about. And also knowing that liquidity is king, which means knowing that you can go into something and go out of it quickly is more important than going into something where you need to wait 10 years to get a return.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Listen, Roger, I am conscious of the time here. I know that you've got something else to get onto on the half hour, and I've also got to catch an airplane. So I actually had a little video here which was going to share a little bit, and I didn't even know you were going to talk about property, but just to share a little bit about the property space. But what I'll do is we'll email this out to everyone because we don't really have time. And I think what I just wanted to point out is, you ironically, you alluded to property, but I mean, the old model of property is really quite badly broken, where people don't trust the system. There's no transparency. There's a huge amount of fees between the investor and the investment. And I'm being quite kind here. There's generally 16 different middlemen between the investor and the investment. And really, when one talks about platforms and technology, it's just bringing people together. But whether you're investing locally or internationally, locally is difficult enough. But once you go internationally, it becomes even more difficult. And I think that's one of the things that excites us in terms of the platform we've put together, and where people from Africa and Asia and other emerging markets can invest in first world markets like America, England, Australia. And actually, we're quite excited, and we're not there yet, but hopefully in the near future it'll be South Africa, and hopefully we'll even be doing your resort with you and or other resorts around the world. And that's really our aim, is to make it easy and accessible. Many people dream of owning a resort, but actually being able to have a piece of it is what really excites me, because like you said, it's more than just an investment. It's also purposeful, and at some level it also has a component of ego to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
Is that so?
I think that's one other thing I'll just share, because what you're doing in creating a community of people that can come together is as much about not just what returns people can get by investing in crowdfunding. It's the connections you get with others that you're investing with that you can then learn from as well. Because both entrepreneurship and investing are frankly pretty lonely pastimes if you're doing them on your own. And so I love doing anything collaboratively, because I get as much out of it by the people I meet and can connect with and learn from as I do from whatever is happening with my time and money as well.
Yeah. No, look, and I think this weekend was a classic example of it. And I mean, I just wanted to share with people, and I actually just want to let them know of a couple of dates and stuff that's coming up. Because I mean, we've managed to, we're very, very lucky, and I mean, you're included in this with amazing people around the world that have come together from everywhere, from Asia, from Australia, from America, from South Africa. And the beauty is now is that people get to collaborate and be part of this community. And this is not even taking the wealth partners into account. And we had this AGM on the weekend where people from all over the place, and it's just amazing. And it's such an awesome community to be part of, and you just learn so much because different skills coming from all different areas. So in conclusion, I just wanted to let people know that Henny and Michiel and them have found some more great medical opportunities in America. We've actually just launched an opportunity in Australia. Literally, it's going live today. I think it is today or tomorrow. So there is, but tonight wasn't about necessarily, or today necessarily about doing it, but just letting people know about it. But I think one of the things that is most important is that if people go onto the platform, they can get access to all our different resources, the different white papers, copy of my book. They can get access to videos from Dolph. And really what's exciting, and Roger, you've helped us with this, we used to be at $100,000. We've managed to get it down to $10,000, and we've actually beta tested at $100. So, I mean, really, for me, it truly is changing that accessibility now in terms of where people are. And, next week we've got Hilda. For all the ladies out there, please come online. Hilda's a very successful business lady. She's got a lot of experience both in business and investment, both locally and internationally. And she's going to be sharing what it means to be going through the challenges of business and investing as a lady, as a mother, and really about empowering women and actually showing them how she's done it and some of the lessons that she's learned. Just to repeat, Roger's actually out here in October. And, I don't know, Roger, if you're doing them around the country between Cape Town and Durban. I'm not sure, or is it just in
Johannesburg for the weekend, or the fast forward event.
Okay. So, I mean, we'll get those dates out to everyone, but I highly, highly recommend that people come along to that. And then just lastly, from my side, I'll be traveling around the country doing breakfasts on the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th of June. And Kevin's already put it in the chat box. And then for our VIP clients and our wealth partners, we'll be doing dinners in Johannesburg on Monday night, in Durban on Tuesday night, and in Cape Town on Wednesday night. So if you want to come, we've got a very unique makeup. If you've been to one of our breakfasts before, I guarantee you it'll be completely different. A bit like what Roger said, he got me invited to Abundance 360. I've also been to South by Southwest, which Roger told me to go to. So I'm really also trying to share a lot of what's happening around the world and how that can influence people from an investment perspective and their knowledge perspective. So I think really, and then also just one of the guys also mentioned, if you want to join our golf days, let us know. We've got the golf days coming up. I think in conclusion, Roger, I asked you about the family office, and I love what's happening with family offices around the world, but yet at the moment they're only for very, very wealthy families. And I tend to say to people, why can we not put the power of a family office, take the wealth dynamics test and other tests like that, make them unique to an individual, and then help them know where to invest, but with the freedom and ease of whether it's their cell phone, their iPad, or as you said, in 5 years it might just be gadgets with AR. But really that's what we want to do, is put the best opportunities with the best partners in the world and put them in the hands of everyone. And so I just wanted to thank you very much, Roger, for your time. It's been awesome having you online, and thank you for sharing so much. I always learn so much, and so I'm sure that everyone else online has learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.
That's awesome. Well, I think a big theme in this whole call has been think globally, and I think just Scott, the way you've done that and just gone out and that's a great example. And I definitely just as a final word to everyone, just really, really encourage you all to just surround yourself with people that are constantly thinking globally. And then again, like I said, it's like a cold. You're going to catch it. It's just a matter of time. But it's definitely worth it, because we're living in very, very challenging but also very exciting times. And being on the right side of that equation is a really important thing to be. Thanks a lot.
Oh, awesome, man. Well, listen, good luck with your event in Hong Kong, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. And again, thanks to everyone who's been online, and I look forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And Roger, I look forward to catching up with you in the near future.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone, for being on the call. Bye.
Bye then.